There we are. All right. So could you introduce yourself and talk about your position at Hamlin?
My name is Mike Reynolds. I'm a professor of English, currently chair of the English department and our first year writing program. Been at Hamlin since 2001 and been in a lot of institutional administrative positions over the years. Dean's office, provost's office, undergraduate research. So had my fingers in a lot of soups over the years.
Right on. And could you talk about kind of your life outside of Hamlin and your involvement in community or any other efforts?
So I live 5 blocks from Hamlin, and wanted to move into the Hamline-Midway neighborhood. And from the get-go, during my time at the university, began working with the local district council, the neighborhood organization called the Hamline Midway Coalition. And I did so informally over the first 15 years, and then moved more formally into that organization and serve on the board of directors now. So it's the local district council. We're kind of in between neighborhood needs and city concerns around certain issues like environment, land use, development, transportation, but a broader reach to kind of think about just what kind of community do we want to be and how do we want to help ensure that the city evolves in ways that align with who we are, we want to be. I've also been really involved with the public arts working group here in the neighborhood that's been involved in kind of bringing artists to do murals on walls on Snelling, intersections. We've done paint the pavement work, which is about traffic calming as well as space and placemaking, and so on and so forth, stuff like that. I get involved with those just because I meet somebody. I'm like, oh, that's a cool idea. Let me help with that. And that's how I get kind of involved.
Very good. We're going to return to that. But first off, what does sustainability mean to you and why?
So it's interesting. Later on in the questions that you gave me, sustainability, at one point you swap and say environmentalism. And I think if you had asked me this 20 years ago, I would have thought sustainability is about environmentalism. And while interested, it wasn't at the center of my thinking. It was kind of something I might add in, but I've always been a systems thinker. And I think when I really found my place in the kind of the work towards sustainability, it's aligned with what I think I never effectively named as sustainability previously. If you're thinking about where it comes from, I grew up in a family with a lot of people with different mental and physical needs. And my dad was a special ed teacher, and so I was always involved. And what you begin to learn quickly if you're inside that community is that it's about a system, a real ecosystem of the way we do and don't provide access and opportunity. And I just began thinking about disability as not something that an individual has, but as a whole set of systems that come to bear and impact people living without disabilities. So when I think about sustainability, that's what I think about, is complex systems in which we reside that we could do a better job of establishing meaningful, interdependent use of our resources to ensure that everybody thrives. And I could pick that up and talk about higher education. I could pick that up and talk about a neighborhood. I could explicitly talk about environmental stuff, but I think it's a broader sweep than what maybe I, as a coming of age in the 80s, would have thought of as sustainability. Would have been a much narrower range of the parks and DNR rather than this larger sweep.
Yeah, for this conversation, I think it would be good to focus on sustainability in the context, not in the context of environmentalism, just from your background. Yeah. Could you talk about that more in an educational institution?
Yeah, so one of the things when we talk, I've been involved with student success efforts. How do we look at helping all students to succeed? And I think at one point that was a question of access. Well, we just need to make sure that our admissions processes are not keeping certain people out, that we're doing something to broaden the equitable access. We began to realize that access doesn't mean success. That there are all sorts of things that, for instance, students coming from different school systems with different tax bases, with different have different levels of pre-college preparation and training, and so they walk in the door not lacking the capacity to succeed, but never having been given the economic kind of challenges in respective school systems, the real opportunity to be prepared. It's not a capacity issue. Let me step back and talk about the ACT. So we would often use the ACT as a kind of metric, standardized testing as a metric of student capacity. ACT, we know, correlates like incredibly strongly with family income. So what we're basically saying is that people who make less than $60,000 a year, or people whose ACT scores are below 22, we're saying that they aren't going to be successful in college. Recognizing that problem has helped me to kind of reframe how I think about student success and how we start to talk about it at the institution. It's not enough to say, give them a college writing class. It's not enough to say, give them a financial literacy program that allows them to be more. It has to be a more sweeping, comprehensive approach to all the factors that have led to where they're at right now coming in the door. I'll add in as well, it's also tied to affordability. Almost all of our financial aid systems are based on standardized testing, GPA, all these things that are tied to economics and inequities baked into American culture. And so it's really hard to disrupt those inequalities to make college an engine for social mobility unless you address the financial challenges in affordability and access that we haven't hired right now. And Lord knows we have not cracked that, but that's where I think the conversation is to see student success as a complex ecosystem problem, not an individual grit and resilience problem.
Yeah, that is all fascinating, and I'm curious what you think if valuing creativity is also a variable in this or not, because when we talk about things like ACT and well, methods of measuring intelligence, whether they are biased or not coming from a place that is actually representative of that individual. Do you think that a shift in the value of creativity could also change how we move forward?
Yes, I don't know how to measure that in a way that doesn't reduce it to some metric that is contained within or constrained by the systems that we're in. I can see it at the curriculum level. So to move us away from imagining our introductory classes or 1,000-level classes as content delivery systems, but instead to focus on developing the capacity for inquiry and creative problem solving, and emphasize that, because content you picked up whenever later on help people to get better at working on a team, solving a problem across various disciplinary expertise. That changes, I think, their ability to be successful in college. So we've had some luck at the curricular level for 1,000-level classes or our first-year seminar of trying to change what we're doing. It's not, again, give them the foundational content that it's help them develop the skills to communicate, to solve problems with different sorts of answers, to do inquiry. And this ties back to, Hamline has a partnership with an elementary school across the street right now. And we're trying to move to a model of inquiry at that elementary, because this has to be a K-16 problem. We have to start teaching inquiry inquiry has to be the center of education from probably pre-kindergarten, but certainly as early as we can get it going. None of our educational measures address creativity in this way. None of them.
Yeah.
So it's hard.
No, I mean, that's all interesting, and it's great to hear what's happening with that elementary school, the collaboration there. So I was reviewing a bit of this book right before this meeting. It's just a few articles on place and placemaking. You mentioned your involvement with the arts and mural making. Could you talk more about that?
So I'm riding on the coattails of somebody who had the idea, who said we have on Snelling Avenue a major thoroughfare running right up to us alongside the university and splitting the Midway neighborhood right in half. Um, it's a tremendously underdeveloped corridor for a number of different reasons, but there's a lot of blank buildings, empty buildings. There's a lot of blank walls. And Jonathan Oppenheimer, a local activist, was like, it would be great if we could get local artists to, if we could give them money to put murals up just to make the place look more like who we are and what we want to see. From his initiative, he's helped to shape, and I've been part of a kind of public arts working group that has done other mural projects around the neighborhood, that has been involved with other sorts of, what are other ways that people want to make their spaces? Somebody had seen the Paint the Pavement project. It emerged out of Portland, I believe, and it was a traffic calming idea. But it's a beautiful, you get the neighbors together at the intersection, you do this design or painting that everybody comes together on. So they're literally making the art that shapes the community that they're in. And then it has these other kind of corollary impacts on improving wellness and health in the neighborhood. Incredibly cool stuff. We've done a couple of public arts festivals, one of which a year ago was not just let's bring in local artists and give them a chance to sell their stuff, but let's bring in local artists who will do arts projects with people who come to the festival. And it was we kind of piloted it, and then this year was COVID. But we hope to kind of come back to it because it became this beautiful opportunity where a poet's sitting down and people come by, kids, adults, they make poetry together. There was a couple other that they were doing chalk designs on the, so it became an opportunity to bring people together around making art in a park nearby that has occasionally had challenges, currently has an encampment for people without housing right now. So it's a park that often is a crux for a lot of the challenges in urban life in the cities, in St. Paul. So bringing the community together into that space is about art, sure, but it's also about making community and kind of owning that space collectively in an inclusive and equitable way.
No, I think that's all great and accurate. When I lived in Portland, when you see these street murals and these spaces that are just have all this decor that is made by the community, it really activates the space, and you just see these very interesting positive consequences that come out of that, and you can tie it back to just the feeling of being in the space. It feels nice to be in it, and the many things that the positive things that come out of that. But so one thing this might be a bigger question than it sounds, but often the good community is kind of a moving target when you have different stakeholders and opinions on the table. But I'm curious how you might define a good community, or what are some things that are desirable in a good community?
Yeah,
I know that's a big question.
So, I mean, you joked about living in the postmodern times, and I'm a boot-wearing, card-carrying postmodernist. I think there's opportunity here. And what I would say is one of the things a good community does is it doesn't settle on a definition, but is constantly reimagining that definition. If we look at Hamline Midway, we're supposed to create a neighborhood plan every 10 years. So we did one 10 years ago. The city asked us to do it as a district council, and it focused on historic preservation. And one of the ways that I think I have heard community activists who care a lot about what a good community is define their sense of it is through, they would use the word sustaining, I would use the word maintaining a sense of identity based on some vision of history. Historic preservation I think, was a kind of synecdoche. It was a tagline that represented, hey, the way we maintain a good community is by sticking to the identity we always have had. I don't think, I mean, one, it's picking a particular moment in time and preserving or historicizing that. And it's not necessarily reflective of For instance, the fact that 40 or 50% of the people living in the neighborhood rent. And so historic preservation, which privileges homes and certain kinds of structures for single families, given the zoning laws, it immediately, once you start emphasizing that as a good community or defining a community identity around that vision of history, you lock out certain kinds of people who live in the community already. So that's my little plea for, open-ended definition and constant inquiry into who we are and what we're doing. The second thing I do would be to materialize that. What are do you have the right mix of housing opportunities and educational opportunities and career development opportunities to serve various different people who come in and out of a vibrant city? A good community, maybe it's true in every kind of, whether a small town or a city, maybe it's always true, but certainly in a city, there's so much flux in terms of who lives that you have to create that kind of dynamic opportunity that really represents different needs. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to career development. You can't have a one-size-fits-all approach to housing. You need a mix, and you need to constantly be evaluating that mix. Good community does that in some way. And then it's just, real education, meaningful, substantive, critical, creative educational opportunities for all, from pre-K to, elder care. I think elder care is another thing that I've learned from some colleagues on the coalition is something we need to spend a lot more time thinking about. Is how does the community you're in actually engage with folks who've aged out of work life and have different sorts of needs. And the other population I would name is St. Paul has seen different waves of immigration. And so I think there needs to be a constant attention to cross-cultural competency as well as cross-cultural learning and cross-cultural engagement. It's really easy in a city that's for 4 months of the year, 5 months of the year is so cold that nobody goes out of the house. It's really easy just to lock into spaces and never really get to know one another. So what are the ways that we constantly shape and encourage cross constituency, cross identity engagement and collaboration and just convening, just public convening, which I've learned in the coalition is a lot harder to do than you think.
Yeah, I mean, this kind of just reminds me of the role of an urban planner or someone who is interested in urban planning. And maybe we can talk about that. But well, you kind of talk about how, like, let me say this. Do you think that we need to install some sort of firmware or hardware to try to go outside of our comfort zone to learn these different perspectives? As someone living in a diverse city or space, that we need to start going out of our way to understand those opinions to create a better space for everyone. Maybe that sounds a little more simple than it sounds, but
no, it's like the question of I'm going to forget, it's Beverly Tatum. Why do all the black kids sit together? I mean, in school classroom, in a cafeteria, it's really hard. Understandably, you're in a particular faith community. You have a particular circle of friends, or you do a certain kind of sport. Those are the people you always see, and you don't tend to meet others. So I like that idea of firmware. What would that look like if you had spaces that produced or provoked, nudged or encouraged, or better verbs there, cross community engagement? I actually think local businesses can do that. Small, effective local businesses that are open door. And I could point around Snelling Cafe, Eureka Compass, Ginkgo. They're locally owned businesses that lots of people coming in and out and through those doors. And those become spaces, if everybody feels like they own that local business in some way, they're part, that's their business. Suddenly you have this, I think, that a firm, settled institution where people will kind of connect and engage. Ideally, something like a coalition or other sorts of neighborhood organizations could do this sort of thing. Churches could do it. Um, the African Economic Development Corps Consortium could do this. There are different local organizations and nonprofits. I think Springboard for the Arts does a great job of trying to build kind of meaningful sites for kind of cross constituency engagement. But it has to be intentional. It's not just going to happen.
Yeah, and I think those kind of efforts also give everyone more of a sense of agency as well. And I would love to kind of dive into some more topics of this. I am looking at the time, but I'm going to return to a few of the questions I sent. All interesting. I'd love to talk about that at another time. So what keeps you doing this kind of work? You're very busy. You're also a professor teaching. What motivates you to stick with this work?
Probably, I'll boil it down to three things. One is I'm a teacher because I like to learn, and so questions and problems and those interest me. And so an interesting question, even if it's about, maybe particularly if it's about something I don't know much about, becomes something I want to learn more about and then try to help engage with. And that could be from zoning, which I knew nothing about until I sat on a local development committee, to public arts, which I'm not. I don't have any interest in being an artist, but I'm fascinated by the intersection of art. All these things intrigue me, and then I end up getting caught up. People, I'll meet somebody who I think is doing really interesting work, and then I think, how can I help to empower or facilitate that work more effectively? I find that I feel like, maybe that's why I'm a teacher too. I feel more excited if I'm giving somebody else the resources and tools to succeed at the thing they want to be good at than any particular initiative of my own. And that's true in the classroom, and it's true in local community organizational work. And the last thing is I look around at what kind of city do I want to live in. That it's very much about that. I don't want to live in a city where it's all, even if I like the chain restaurants, it's all chain restaurants. I don't want to live in a city where I have to drive 10 miles to get to any of the different things that I want to do. I want to kind of build a space that really speaks to something that feels both really livable and sustainable. Exciting for me to live there, but also I don't feel ashamed by any of the things that are going on there. So.
No, I think that's great. And just how you said, like, that you like to learn. I think that's a I think that's a very powerful point, because I think about, like, it's important to know how to enjoy learning, or learn how to learn, so that you want to continue that learning, to extend it. And that's something, when I think about my education, is it wasn't until kind of the late years of college where I just realized, like, I enjoy doing this. It's not, being shot at me that, I have to read and do this stuff, but it's somehow finding that tipping point, or that realization that learning is useful in so many different ways. And yeah, that's almost something I wish was kind of told to students at some points.
It gets back to what you said about creativity. I read a book by an anthropologist who talked about learning is something that seems to be innate in human beings, and yet it gets beaten out of us by our educational system. So it becomes a chore, and that's a challenge.
Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, of course it's innate. Yeah, it's something that we've evolved with. I could talk about that all day. I'm gonna keep moving here. Let's see here. What are some projects happening on campus that you think resonate with sustainability? Some good efforts that you see on campus that are happening right now?
Well, I think we could go back to our Center for Global Environmental Education as a still doing great work, but also a kind of an originator of meaningful community-based inquiry and work, so that the university serves to address specific problems and challenges with community partners in effective ways. Valentine Kadir has picked up that work as the director of sustainability at Hamline. CG still does this work, but that sort of thing, that a university could be about helping communities to find ways to address the challenges and opportunities that they face. That's exciting to me. I mentioned student success before, and I think there's this ongoing effort to just have a more complicated, sophisticated understanding of student success and the factors that address it, impact it, as well as a more complex set of tools to address it. And curriculum, which is where I will go back to creativity or learning. We need to be training people to be complex problem solvers, because that's the world's only going to get tougher and tougher as climate change rolls along. And so I feel like it isn't just having curricular pockets about environmentalism or climate change. It has to be baked into some kind of core skills about adaptability, where environmental questions are always part of the kind of thing you think about. Just the way, fingers crossed, we've sort of kind of moved to integrate multicultural work across the curriculum. It's not an add-on in biology with one course. It has to be a vital part of everything that we do. I think environmentalism and sustainability has to be part of that core set of skills across the curriculum, embedded everywhere. And we're making baby steps in that direction.
Yeah, no, I think that's great. Like, very well done. So kind of earlier, I think off camera, you mentioned that would you call yourself an optimist?
No.
You wouldn't. Okay.
I said you have to be optimistic.
Yeah.
But it's kind of like a calculated choice, or what I am is I'm a pessimist who always I'm a pessimist in outlook and an optimist in action.
A realist, maybe?
Probably. I'm pragmatic.
Sure.
What can we do? What could be done today? No problem. However anxious I might be about how intractable it seems, no problem is intractable. There are opportunities. You could even just redesign how you think about the problem, and suddenly it opens up doors to address it in different ways. And so in that way, I feel like nothing is totally resistant to creativity and collaborative engagement from, dedicated community members. Maybe that's a kind of pragmatic optimism in action.
No, I think that's great. Well, I'm gonna kind of wrap up here. I think we did cover like a lot of ground, and I'm very confident about this interview. Could you share any books, articles, movies, interests that people should know about?
So I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat, but there's a writer Kim Stanley Robinson, writes great science fiction. And over the years, he's done all kinds of amazing things around the intersection of politics, science, culture, and various science fictional world-changing events. For the last 15, 20 years, his primary focus seems to have been climate change, and what we can and should and could do about it. His most recent book is called The Ministry of the Future, and it imagines about 50 years out what is possible. Recognizing the opening chapter is a horrific event based on a kind of climate climate-driven disaster, but the whole book is based on the premise that you can do things, even in a system where politics seems inevitably tied to, economic interests or horribly riven by polarization. You can still imagine effective action. So his book, The Ministry of the Future, or even more, he has an interview with a journalist, Ezra Klein, in a podcast, which is just fantastic. So I just shared the link with you. Even if you don't read the book, because the book is more or less successful, but this conversation for an hour, it's just fantastic. Because again, I think it's pragmatic and pragmatically pessimistic about some of the challenges we face, but optimistic about here are all the ways that not only can we do it, but we've done it in the past. Really, really intriguing.
All right, I think that's great. I may have heard this podcast at some point, but I'll have to revisit it for sure. Very good. Thanks for doing this, Mike.
Yeah, good talking to you, Carl.
Yeah, I'm gonna end our recording really quick.